For 730 days, my husband Marcus told me he was going to the gym every Tuesday afternoon. He lied. When the coroner handed me the key to safe deposit box 402, I thought I would find cash or maybe a love letter. Instead, I found a USB drive that turned my grieving into a war zone. If you think you know the people you sleep next to, think again. Before I tell you what was on that drive, hit that like button if you have ever discovered a secret that shattered your reality. My name is Keisha, and at 32, I was standing in the middle of my own living room still wearing the black veil from burying the love of my life just 2 hours prior. The scent of lilies and stale condolences still clung to my dress. I just wanted silence. I wanted to curl up on Marcus's favorite leather armchair, smell his cologne, and pretend the aneurysm hadn't stolen him from me. But silence is a luxury the greedy never afford the grieving. I walked into the sunken living room of our Chicago brownstone, a space I had meticulously designed with minimalist warmth, only to find it invaded. Tanisha, my sister-in-law, was sprawled across the cream velvet sofa with her heels still on. She was holding one of my Waterford crystal flutes, the specific ones Marcus and I had toasted with at our wedding reception in Napa Valley. She swirled the dark red liquid not with reverence but with boredom, watching the expensive vintage coat the glass. She took a sip and grimaced, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh that echoed off the high ceilings. "This tastes like vinegar, Keisha. Did Marcus really keep this swill in the cellar? Or is this the best you could afford now that the breadwinner is gone?" She laughed, a sharp sound that grated against my raw nerves. I felt a physical blow to my chest. That bottle was a 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon that Marcus had been saving for our 5th anniversary next month. Tanisha was treating it like cheap gas station wine. I tightened my grip on my purse, trying to summon the composure Marcus always admired in me. I asked them to please respect the house and my need for rest. I told them the reception was over and guests had left hours ago. That was when my mother-in-law Bernice finally looked up from where she sat. She had taken residence in the high-backed wing chair near the fireplace, the one Marcus used to call his throne. She looked at me not as a daughter-in-law who had just lost her husband, but as a squatter who had overstayed her lease. Bernice smoothed her silk skirt, her eyes dry and sharp as flint. She did not look like a mother mourning her son. She looked like a general surveying a conquered battlefield. She said, "Leave the girl alone, Tanisha. Keisha probably does not know the difference between a Pinot Noir and grape juice given where she came from. But that changes today." I froze. The disrespect was nothing new. They had always looked down on my humble upbringing, despite my own career success. But doing this on the day of the funeral was a new level of cruelty. I asked them politely to leave my home. Bernice stood up slowly, walking over to the mantel to run a finger over the dust-free surface. She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and delivered the first blow. "We are not going anywhere, Keisha. Someone responsible needs to oversee the assets now that my son is gone. We will be staying here until the probate settles to make sure nothing of value goes missing from the family estate." Before I could process Bernice's declaration of war, the heavy oak door connecting the kitchen to the garage swung open. The sound of heavy footsteps broke the tension, but what followed shattered my composure completely. Chad, Tanisha's husband, strolled into the kitchen. He was a man who always wore suits that were slightly too tight, trying to project a success his bank account never reflected. He was whistling a tune, casually tossing a set of keys in the air and catching them with a rhythmic clinking sound. My heart stopped. I knew that specific jingle. It was the heavy brass keychain with the leather fob that Marcus had custom ordered for his 1968 Porsche 911. That car was not just a vehicle. It was Marcus's pride, a restoration project that had taken him 5 years of weekends to perfect. He treated that car better than he treated his own health. Chad saw me staring at his hand and didn't even flinch. He smiled, a tight, patronizing expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Keisha, just wanted to make sure the battery didn't die. These vintage engines are temperamental. You know how it is. If you don't run them, the seals dry out." I extended my hand palm up. I kept my voice steady, though my hands were trembling. Thank you for the concern, Chad, but you can put the keys back in the bowl. That car is not to be driven. It is part of the estate inventory now. Chad did not hand them over. Instead, he shoved his hands deep into the pockets of his beige chinos, effectively burying my husband's legacy along with his lint. Actually, that is exactly why I need to hold on to these. I was looking at the insurance policy, and since the primary driver is deceased, the premiums are going to skyrocket unless there is a designated driver on record with a clean history. I am just trying to save you some money, Keisha. I will keep it at our place for safekeeping, so no vandals get any ideas while the house is practically empty. I looked at Tanisha, expecting her to check her husband, but she was too busy inspecting her nails. Bernice, however, nodded in approval from the other room. Listen to Chad, Keisha. He knows about these things. He is in real estate. He understands liability. You should be thanking him for taking that burden off your hands. A woman living alone does not need a sports car. My blood was boiling beneath my skin. Chad was a failed real estate agent who hadn't sold a property in 2 years. I knew his license was suspended because I had seen the mail Marcus tried to hide from me to protect Tanisha's feelings. But they didn't know that I knew. They thought I was just the grieving widow, confused and overwhelmed. Chad patted his pocket, the metallic clink of the keys sounding like a jail cell locking. He walked past me to the fridge, opening it as if he paid the electric bill. Consider it handled, he said over his shoulder, grabbing a beer. I stood there realizing this wasn't just an intrusion, it was a hostile takeover. They weren't just here to mourn. They were here to strip the carcass clean before the body was even cold. And the worst part was, I had to let them think they were winning. For now. The sound of splintering wood tore through the hallway before I could even finish my thought. It came from the direction of the study, Marcus's sanctuary. The one room in the house that remained locked because he handled sensitive vendor contracts and employee payrolls there. I ran down the corridor, my heels clicking frantically against the hardwood. When I reached the door, my stomach dropped. The lock had been forced open, the brass plate hanging loosely by a single screw. Inside it looked like a tornado had touched down. Papers were scattered everywhere. Invoices, tax returns, and restaurant menus carpeted the floor. Tanisha was dumping out the contents of the mahogany desk drawers, creating a mountain of debris while Chad was tapping on the walls looking for a hidden safe. Bernice stood in the center of the chaos, holding Marcus's framed degree from Howard University, as if assessing its pawnshop value. I screamed at them to stop. I told them this was illegal, that they were destroying private property. Bernice just laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She told me that nothing in this house was private anymore because her son was dead, and she had a right to know what he had left behind for his real family. That was when Tanisha squealed in delight. She pulled a worn black leather planner from the bottom drawer. It was the one Marcus carried everywhere, the one he used to jot down recipe ideas in business meetings. But Tanisha wasn't looking for recipes. She flipped through the pages frantically until she found the recurring entry. "Look, Mama!" she shouted, waving the book in the air like a trophy. She pointed to the calendar grid. Every single Tuesday for the last 2 years, 2 p.m., bank. Bernice snatched the book from her daughter's hands. Her eyes scanned the pages, widening with greed. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice trembling with avarice. She looked at me with a triumphant sneer. "I told you, Keisha. I told you my son was a good man. He wasn't just going to the bank to deposit checking slips. He was building the filial piety fund. He promised me 5 years ago that when his business took off, he would set aside a retirement fund just for me. $500,000. That is what he promised." She tapped the page with a manicured fingernail. "Every Tuesday. That means he was making deposits. Cash deposits that you probably didn't know about because you were too busy spending his money on decorative pillows." She closed the book and clutched it to her chest. "This proves it. The money in that bank vault is mine, and I am not leaving this house until I get every single cent." I stood in the doorway, paralyzed. I knew Marcus went to the bank on Tuesdays, but he had told me it was for gym sessions and vendor meetings. The lie hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Was it possible? Had he really been siphoning off $500,000 for a woman who had called him worthless until he became rich? For the first time since he died, I didn't just feel grief. I felt the cold, sharp edge of betrayal. I volunteered to go to the grocery store, not because I wanted to serve them, but because I needed to breathe air that wasn't poisoned by their entitlement. Bernice had handed me a shopping list that looked more like a demand for tribute. She wanted organic strawberries, imported sparkling water, and thick-cut ribeye steaks. Tanisha had added specific requests for gluten-free artisanal crackers and a brand of champagne that cost $80 a bottle. I pushed the cart through the aisles of the upscale market, my body moving on autopilot while my mind raced. I was numb. The total at the register came to $340. I didn't flinch. I just wanted to pay, get out, and survive another night. I pulled out the platinum debit card connected to the joint account Marcus and I had shared for 5 years. It was the account used for household expenses, the one that had never been overdrawn a day in its life. I inserted the chip and waited. The terminal let out a harsh mechanical buzz. Declined. The cashier, a young woman with purple hair who looked like she would rather be anywhere else, sighed loudly. "Try it again," she said, tapping her fingers on the counter. I wiped the chip on my skirt, my face heating up as I felt the eyes of the line behind me boring into my back. I inserted it again. Declined. "Please contact your financial institution." I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly, and dialed the priority banking number. I expected to hear that it was a fraud alert, perhaps triggered by the unusual spending patterns so soon after the funeral. Instead, the voice on the other end was apologetic but firm. "Mrs. Jenkins, I am afraid that account has been frozen effective immediately. We received a certified notification of a probate dispute regarding the estate assets. A party named Bernice Jenkins submitted an affidavit claiming potential dissipation of funds. Until the executor is officially appointed by the court, all liquid assets are locked." I stared at the phone in disbelief. Bernice had not just invaded my home, she had called the bank while I was driving to the store. She had accused me of stealing my own husband's money before the dirt on his grave had even settled. She had cut off my lifeline. The cashier cleared her throat. "Ma'am, are you going to pay for this or not? People are waiting." I looked at the cart filled with the food that my tormentors were waiting to eat. I should have walked away. I should have left the cart there and let them starve. But I knew that would only give them more ammunition to call me unstable. I dug into my purse, pulling out the emergency cash envelope I kept for tipping housekeepers and valet drivers. I counted out crumpled $20 bills, fives, and even quarters. I paid for their feast with pocket change, humiliation burning in my throat with every coin I placed on the counter. I walked out to the parking lot, the heavy bags cutting into my fingers, realizing that Bernice wasn't just greedy, she was trying to starve me out. The aroma of rosemary and searing beef filled the kitchen, a cruel contrast to the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. I had spent 2 hours preparing the feast Bernice demanded, searing the ribeyes exactly to medium rare, just the way Marcus used to like them, even though he was no longer here to eat them. My feet ached from standing in the heels I hadn't taken off since the cemetery, but I focused on the rhythm of the knife chopping vegetables. It was the only thing keeping me grounded. When everything was ready, I arranged the meat on the good china, the heavy porcelain platters that were usually reserved for Thanksgiving. I carried the heavy tray into the dining room, expecting to finally sit down and rest. The conversation at the table stopped abruptly the moment I crossed the threshold. Tanisha was already seated at the head of the table, my spot pouring herself another glass of the $80 champagne. Chad was tucking a napkin into his collar, like a cartoon villain preparing to feast. I placed the platter in the center of the table and moved to pull out the empty chair at the far end, the one usually reserved for guests. Bernice cleared her throat, a sharp sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "Actually, Keisha," she said, her voice dripping with faux politeness. "We need to discuss sensitive family legal matters regarding the estate distribution. It would be inappropriate for you to be present since you are technically the opposing party in the probate filing." I stood there, my hand gripping the back of the chair until my knuckles turned white. "You want me to eat in the kitchen?" I asked, my voice flat. Bernice didn't even look at me. She picked up the serving fork and stabbed a steak. We just want to protect your privacy, Keisha. What we are discussing involves deep financial history that you are not privy to. You can fix yourself a plate and eat at the breakfast nook. It is for the best. I turned to leave, humiliation burning my cheeks, when Chad spoke up, his mouth already full of the food I had paid for with my pocket change. Speaking of financial history, he said, chewing loudly, we need to address the elephant in the room, the $200,000 Marcus borrowed from me last year for the restaurant expansion. I have been patient because he was family, but now that he is gone, I need that capital back. I have the promissory note right here in my digital files. I froze near the doorway. Marcus had never borrowed a dime from Chad. In fact, Marcus had bailed Chad out of 3 failed business ventures. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Chad was trying to establish a debt against the estate to drain whatever cash was left. I wanted to scream, to call him a liar, to throw the rest of the dinner into the trash, but I caught Bernice's eye. She was watching me, waiting for me to explode so she could call me unstable. I swallowed the rage, tasting bile. I will let the lawyers handle any claims, Chad, I said quietly. Bernice waved a hand at me dismissively. We will handle the finances. Just make sure the pots are scrubbed and the kitchen is spotless before you go to bed. We do not want roaches in this house. Now close the door, we have business to discuss. I scrubbed the grease from the steak knives until my knuckles were raw, the sound of running water, the only thing drowning out the laughter from the dining room. I had just dried the last platter when a heavy thud shook the ceiling above me. It sounded like furniture was being overturned. I dropped the towel and ran up the spiral staircase, my heart pounding against my ribs, fearing that perhaps Bernice had collapsed or Chad had broken something in a drunken stupor. But when I reached the second-floor landing, the scene before me was not an accident. It was an eviction. The hallway, usually a pristine gallery of Marcus's black and white photography, was now a landfill of my personal belongings. My clothes were everywhere. The emerald silk gown I wore to the formidable winter gala lay crumpled in a heap. My cashmere sweaters, the ones Marcus had bought me in Paris, were scattered across the floor like dirty rags. Standing in the doorway of the master bedroom was Tanisha. She had her arms full of my blazers and skirts, and the moment she saw me, she didn't freeze or apologize. She simply tossed the bundle into the corridor, watching as a pearl button on my favorite jacket snapped off and rolled across the hardwood floor. I asked her what she thought she was doing, my voice trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so hot it felt cold. Tanisha dusted her hands off as if touching my wardrobe had contaminated her. She walked past me, kicking a pair of my running shoes out of her path. I am making space, she said casually, as if she were discussing the weather. I need a dedicated studio for my brand. The lighting in the guest room is trash, and the master suite has the best acoustics for my live streams. My followers expect a certain level of luxury, Keisha. I can't be filming with your bargain bin aesthetics in the background. I stepped forward, blocking her path to the stairs. That is my room, Tanisha. That is the bed I shared with your brother. You cannot just throw my life into the hallway because you want to play influencer. Tanisha laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed in the open space. She stepped into my personal space, smelling of the expensive perfume she had likely stolen from my vanity. Wake up, Keisha. Look around you. This house features wainscoting and marble floors. It breathes old money and legacy. You scream rent-controlled apartment. You never fit the aesthetic of this family. Marcus just liked playing savior to the poor girl from the South Side, but the charity case is closed now. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You are damaging the brand just by being here. I am doing you a favor. Start looking for a rental tomorrow. Something in your budget. Maybe a studio apartment near the bus line. Because once the probate clears next month, I am turning this entire floor into my headquarters, and I don't want you lurking in the background ruining my shot. She turned her back on me, walking into the master bedroom and slamming the door in my face. The click of the lock was final. I stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by the scattered remnants of my marriage, realizing that to them, I was just another piece of trash to be swept away. But as I looked down at my clothes, I didn't feel the urge to cry. I felt the urge to destroy. I stepped over my silk gown, leaving it on the floor, and walked straight to the guest room at the end of the hall. I locked the door, not to keep them out, but to keep myself focused on what I had to do next. The click of the deadbolt was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. On the other side of that door, Tanisha was probably already rearranging my furniture to fit her ring lights, and Bernice was likely calculating the resale value of my jewelry collection. Let them have their moment. Their victory lap was about to turn into a funeral march. I sat on the edge of the twin mattress in the cramped guest room and did not shed a single tear. Crying implies helplessness, and I was far from helpless. I reached under the bed and pulled out the matte black Pelican hard case I had kept hidden from everyone, even Marcus. To his family, and largely to him, I was Keisha, the homemaker, the soft-spoken wife who dabbled in data entry to pass the time. It was a comfortable lie that protected his ego. Marcus needed to be the provider, the savior who pulled me out of the neighborhood. I let him have that role because I loved him, but I never needed saving. I dragged the heavy case onto the desk and popped the latches. Inside sat a custom-built dual-screen workstation that cost more than Tanisha's entire wardrobe. I powered it up, the cooling fans humming with a low, aggressive whir. This was not a machine for browsing social media or shopping online. This was a weapon. I placed my thumb on the biometric scanner. A green light flashed and the screen didn't open to a desktop with cute wallpapers. It flooded with cascading lines of code, secure server proxies, and financial tracking software. Welcome back, Ghost. That was my handle in the industry. For the past decade, I hadn't just been typing numbers into spreadsheets. I was a high-level forensic accountant hired by divorce attorneys and federal agencies to find money that powerful people tried very hard to hide. I tracked embezzlement, money laundering, and offshore shell companies for a living. Bernice thought she was bullying a naive widow who didn't understand how probate worked. She had no idea she had just declared war on a woman who could trace a digital dime across 3 continents in under 10 minutes. I cracked my knuckles and opened a new investigation file. I labeled it simply the Tuesday Protocol. If Marcus was hiding money, or if he was being blackmailed, or if he was really just a mama's boy building a nest egg for that witch downstairs, I would know before the sun came up. I typed in Marcus's social security number and bypassed the standard banking login screens using a backdoor algorithm I had developed for auditing purposes. The screen flickered as it began to pull metadata from every financial institution in the state. They wanted to freeze my accounts. Fine. I was about to set their entire world on fire with the truth. I hit enter and watched the data stream begin. It was time to go to work. The blue glow of the dual monitors cut through the darkness of the guest room, illuminating the walls with scrolling lines of code. I cracked my knuckles, a nervous habit from my days as a junior analyst, and focused on the task at hand. Accessing Marcus's private cloud account felt like a violation. We had built our marriage on trust, never demanding passcodes or tracking each other's phones. But that trust had died the moment his family turned my grief into a salvage operation. I wasn't just a snooping wife anymore. I was a forensic investigator entering a crime scene, and the victim was the truth. I bypassed the standard 2-factor authentication using a recovery protocol I had installed on our network years ago for emergencies. The system hesitated for a microsecond before the words "access granted" flashed in green. I didn't waste time reading his texts or emails. People lie in texts. They curate their emails. But metadata never lies. I pulled up the raw GPS telemetry from his phone for the past 24 months and applied a filter. Tuesdays, 1400 hours to 1600 hours. The screen populated instantly with a cluster of red pins forming a dense, undeniable heat map over the downtown financial district. My breath hitched. Tanisha was right about the consistency, but she was dead wrong about the destination. Marcus wasn't going to the local credit union branch where Bernice banked. He wasn't even going to the commercial bank that handled our restaurant payroll. I zoomed in on the map, the satellite view revealing the specific building where my husband had spent the last 2 years of his life. The pins dropped precisely on the Meridian Citadel. It was a black glass fortress that housed the private wealth management division of the Sovereign International Bank. This wasn't a place for checking accounts or holiday funds. This was the vault where old money slept. You didn't just walk into the Meridian. You needed a liquid net worth of $10 million just to get an appointment, and you needed retinal clearance just to call the elevator to the sub-basement. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. Marcus ran a successful soul food chain, but we were comfortable, not ultra-wealthy. We drove nice cars, but we didn't have $10 million sitting liquid. Unless we did. A cold chill ran down my spine. If Marcus had access to the Meridian vaults, he was either hiding a fortune that I knew nothing about, or he was moving money for someone who did. I cross-referenced the duration of his visits. 45 minutes. Every single time. That was too short for a portfolio review with a wealth manager, but it was the exact amount of time required to clear security access, a safe deposit box, and leave. I looked at the red dots, realizing they weren't just locations. They were a breadcrumb trail to a secret life. Marcus wasn't visiting his mother. He was visiting a fortune, or perhaps a liability so dangerous it required military-grade security. I saved the map to my encrypted drive. Step 1 was complete. I knew the where. Now I had to figure out the why before Chad and Bernice realized they were fighting over crumbs while the whole cake was locked away in a steel box downtown. I minimized the map of the financial district. The mystery of why Marcus visited the vault was a puzzle I would solve later. Right now, I had a more immediate threat sleeping down the hall. Chad had walked into my home acting like a real estate mogul, demanding keys to a vintage Porsche and claiming my husband owed him a fortune. I opened a new browser tab and accessed the National Civil and Criminal Records database. I typed in his full legal name, Chadwick Miller, and hit search. I expected to find maybe a speeding ticket or a maxed-out credit card. What I found was a digital crime scene. The screen populated with so many red flags it looked like a bloodbath. Chad was not a developer. He was a professional defendant. My eyes scanned the summary of judgments against him. 3 separate lawsuits for breach of contract in the last 18 months. He had taken deposits from elderly clients for home renovations he never started and then ghosted them. But the civil suits were just the tip of the iceberg. I pulled his credit report using a backdoor lender verification tool. His score was an abysmal 420. He wasn't just broke. He was underwater. I scrolled down to his recent transaction history, which was riddled with cash advances from predatory payday lenders. Then I saw the pattern that explained everything. Transfers to offshore accounts in Curaçao and Antigua. These weren't investments. They were payments to online sports betting sites. Chad wasn't investing in real estate. He was gambling away his mortgage. I did the math in my head. Between the lawsuits and the bookies, Chad was in the hole for over $150,000. The promissory note he had waved at dinner claiming Marcus owed him money wasn't an asset. It was a fabrication born of desperation. He didn't need that money to expand a business. He needed it to keep his kneecaps intact. A chill went down my spine as I realized the gravity of the situation. I wasn't dealing with a greedy brother-in-law who wanted a free ride. I was dealing with a drowning man who would pull everyone down with him just to get a breath of air. I looked at the timestamps on the most recent debt collection notices. They were dated 3 days ago. Final notice. Immediate payment required. Chad was out of time. That explained his aggression. That explained why he tried to take the Porsche immediately. He needed quick cash to pay off a loan shark or settle a judgment before he went to jail. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the danger I was in. A greedy man is annoying, but a desperate man is dangerous. and Chad was desperate enough to do anything. I saved the entire dossier to a secure folder labeled Leverage. If he tried to extort me again, I wouldn't just say no. I would hand him a printout of his own destruction. The sanctuary of my home had been transformed into a theater of cruelty. Bernice had summoned the prayer circle from Grace Tabernacle ostensibly to pray for the soul of her departed son, but in reality to hold a public tribunal where I was the silent defendant. The living room was filled with women in oversized hats and judgmental stares clutching leather-bound Bibles like weapons. I was reduced to the help moving silently across the Persian rug with a silver tea service tray that weighed heavily in my hands, both physically and metaphorically. As I poured Earl Grey into delicate china cups, the conversation did not pause. In fact, it grew louder, ensuring I heard every syllable of my own assassination. Bernice sat in the center of the circle, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked up at the ceiling, her voice trembling with a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Sisters, we must pray for Keisha. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away, but sometimes He withholds blessings for a reason. We all know how badly Marcus wanted a son to carry on the Jenkins name. It was his greatest sorrow that his union was not fruitful." She paused to take a sip of the tea I had just poured, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim of the cup. Perhaps it was divine intervention. The Lord knew that a woman whose heart is filled with the love of money has no room for the love of a child. A collective gasp of faux sympathy rippled through the room. One of the deacons, a woman named Sister Clara, who had never liked me, reached out and patted Bernice's hand. "You are so strong, Bernice. It is a tragedy when a man works himself to death only to have his legacy threatened by those who only see dollar signs. But do not worry. God will protect the widow and the mother. That money Marcus set aside, that filial piety fund you told us about, that is your blessing. It is righteous restitution for the years you spent raising him, while others just reap the benefits." I stood there, the silver teapot hovering over the last cup, feeling the heat of the steam against my wrist. The accusation of being barren was a low blow that Bernice knew would cripple me. We had tried for years. We had seen specialists. The fertility struggle was a private pain Marcus and I had shared in whispered conversations and tearful nights. Bernice had turned my biological heartbreak into a character flaw, framing my infertility as a punishment from God for greed I didn't possess. I wanted to scream. I wanted to overturn the tray and scald the hypocrisy right off their faces, but I remembered the digital file on my computer upstairs. I remembered the leverage folder. I gently placed the teapot on the coffee table, ensuring it didn't make a sound. I straightened my back, smoothing the front of my black dress. "Thank you for your prayers, ladies," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the emotion they were desperate to provoke. "I hope your tea is to your liking. It is a special blend Marcus bought. He always said bitterness ruins the palate." I turned and walked toward the kitchen, feeling their eyes burning into my back. Bernice's voice followed me loud and clear. "Sea cold as ice. No tears. Only a woman waiting for a check behaves like that. Let them pray," I thought as I pushed through the swinging door. They were going to need divine intervention when I was done with them. The last of the prayer circle ladies had finally left, taking their judgment and their oversized hats with them. I was in the kitchen scraping the remnants of cucumber sandwiches into the trash when I heard Tanisha's voice floating down from the staircase. She was on a video call, her voice pitched high and fake, showing off her outfit for the evening. I walked into the hallway to make sure she wasn't dragging her luggage across the hardwood floors again, but what I saw stopped the blood in my veins. Tanisha was posing in the foyer mirror, angling her phone to catch the light. Around her neck, resting against her tawdry leopard print top, was a delicate gold chain holding a small, bruised locket. It wasn't a piece from Marcus. It was the only thing I had left of my mother. She had worn that necklace every day of her life, scrubbing floors and taking in laundry so I could have books for school. It was priceless not because of the carat count, but because it held the sweat and sacrifice of a woman who loved me. I had kept it hidden in a velvet box in the back of my underwear drawer underneath the socks Tanisha hadn't bothered to steal. I didn't think. I just moved. I crossed the distance between us in 2 strides and grabbed her wrist. "Take it off," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Tanisha jumped, dropping her phone. She looked at me with wide, feigned innocence, then rolled her eyes. "God, Keisha, you nearly gave me a heart attack. You are acting like a psycho today. I just borrowed it to see if it worked with this neckline. It is dusty, anyway. I was doing you a favor by airing it out." She pulled away from me, and her finger caught on the delicate chain. There was a sickening pop. The sound was tiny, but in the cavernous hallway it sounded like a gunshot. The locket fell bouncing once on the marble floor before the hinge snapped open, the tiny photo of my mother sliding out face down. I dropped to my knees, my hands trembling as I reached for the broken metal. Tanisha didn't even bend down to help. She just stood there inspecting her manicure. "Oops," she said, her tone devoid of any real apology. "Well, that is what happens when you buy cheap jewelry, Keisha." The clasp was probably rusted through. Honestly, it looked like something you'd find at a flea market. "Don't look so tragic. I will buy you a shiny new one from the mall tomorrow. Something that actually sparkles so you don't look so destitute." I cradled the broken locket in my palm, the metal warm against my skin. She called it flea market trash. She called my mother's legacy cheap. I slowly stood up, closing my fist around the necklace. I didn't scream. I didn't slap her, though every fiber of my being wanted to. Instead, I looked at her with a calmness that finally unsettled her. "The debt you owe just became incalculable, Tanisha," I thought. "You didn't just break a necklace. You just severed the last thread of mercy I had for you." I walked past her without a word, heading straight upstairs to my computer. If she thought a broken necklace was a tragedy, she had no idea what it felt like to have your entire financial future snap in half. And I was going to be the one to pull the chain. The glow of the monitors was the only light in the room, casting long, dancing shadows against the wall that looked like ghosts. I pushed the broken necklace to the side of the desk, using the anger it ignited to fuel my focus. I needed to know who Marcus was meeting at that bank. If he wasn't just moving money, he was communicating with someone. I initiated a deep dive algorithm to scrub his deleted email archives, looking for correspondence with the domain of the Sovereign International Bank. The system word processing terabytes of data in seconds. Then it pinged. A hidden folder. It wasn't in his business account or his personal Gmail. It was buried inside a subdirectory of a fantasy football forum he hadn't used in years. Smart. Sloppy, but smart enough to hide from a casual observer. I cracked the folder open. Inside, there was a chain of emails encrypted with PGP keys, military-grade privacy. My husband, the man who sometimes forgot his Netflix password, was using encryption used by whistleblowers. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I ran the decryption software, watching the progress bar crawl. When the text finally unscrambled, the subject line of the most recent email hit me like a physical slap: "Update on Project Protect K." K. My first instinct was to exhale. K for Keisha. He was protecting me. But then the poison that Bernice had been dripping into my ear for years began to seep into my logic. K is a common initial. Kayla, Kara, Catherine. The email was from a lawyer named Julian Thorne, a specialist in family law and paternity. The words floated on the screen, mocking me. Paternity. Why would Marcus need a paternity lawyer if we never had children? The logical part of my brain shut down, replaced by the terrified, insecure woman who had spent years crying over negative pregnancy tests. I opened the attachment. It was a draft of a trust agreement, but the beneficiary's name was redacted. The text read, "The assets must be shielded completely. The family cannot know about Kay's existence until the transfer is final. We must ensure she is provided for regardless of what happens to me." She, not my wife, not Keisha, just she. Doubt, cold and slimy, coiled around my stomach. Was this why he went to the bank every Tuesday? Was there a woman there, a teller, a manager, someone who gave him what I couldn't? Maybe the family he was hiding Kay from wasn't just his mother and sister. Maybe it was me. Maybe I was the threat. I looked at the wedding ring on my finger, suddenly feeling like a prop in a play I didn't know I was starring in. If Marcus had betrayed me, if all this fighting for his legacy was for another woman's benefit, I would burn this house to the ground myself. I needed to know who Kay was. And I needed to know before I walked into that bank and handed over the keys to a kingdom that might belong to a mistress. I stared at the encrypted email on my screen, the name Kay, burning a hole in my composure when the heavy oak door creaked open behind me. I quickly minimized the window, my heart hammering against my ribs as Chad stepped into the room. He wasn't whistling this time. His face was pale, glistening with a sheen of sweat that the air conditioning couldn't dry. He held a manila envelope in his hand, tapping it rhythmically against his thigh. He didn't look like the arrogant intruder from the garage anymore. He looked like a cornered animal preparing to bite. Chad walked over to the desk and tossed the envelope onto the keyboard, covering my hands. "I thought you should see this before the lawyers get involved," he said, his voice dropping to a faux whisper of concern. "I found it in Marcus's glove compartment when I moved the car. I didn't want to show Tanisha or Bernice. It would kill them to know their golden boy wasn't so perfect." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, pulling out a glossy 8x10 photograph. It was a picture of Marcus walking out of a boutique hotel, his arm around the waist of a tall, elegant woman with her back to the camera. They looked intimate. They looked like a couple. For a second, the world tilted on its axis. The doubt from the email flared up, choking me. But then my forensic training kicked in. I blinked, forcing my brain to switch from heartbroken wife to cold analyst. I looked closer. The lighting was wrong. The shadow cast by Marcus fell to the left, consistent with the afternoon sun, but the woman's shadow was almost non-existent, pooling directly beneath her feet, as if she were standing under noon light. And the pixelation around his hand on her waist was jagged, a telltale sign of a hurried digital overlay. It was a fake. A sloppy, desperate fabrication created by someone who needed leverage fast. Chad leaned in, smelling of stale beer and desperation. "I know it hurts, Keisha, but think about his legacy. If this gets out, if the church finds out, his reputation is ruined. The business will tank. No one buys ribs from a cheater in this town. But I can make this go away. I can burn this photo and the negatives. All I need is your signature on the transfer deed for the restaurant. Just sign it over to me for management purposes. You keep the house, I take the business headache, and Marcus stays a saint." He placed a pen on top of the photo. It was a shakedown, plain and simple. He was banking on my grief making me blind. He thought I was a fragile widow who would pay any price to protect a memory. He didn't know he was trying to con a woman who spotted forged signatures for a living. I looked up at him, letting my eyes fill with tears I didn't feel. "You would do that for him, Chad?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded eagerly. "For family, Keisha. Anything for family." I looked back at the photo. I wasn't going to sign. But I needed him to think I was breaking. I needed him to think he had won just for a few more hours. I pushed the photo back into the envelope. "Give me until tomorrow," I whispered. "I need to say goodbye to him properly before I sign him away." Chad smiled, snatching the envelope back. "Tomorrow, Keisha. Don't make me release this to the tabloids." He walked out, leaving me alone with the realization that my husband's family wasn't just cruel. They were criminals. I stared at the closed door where Chad had just exited, my hands gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. He thought the fake photo was his ace in the hole, but he had underestimated my resolve. I was prepared to fight him on the fraud. I was prepared to fight Bernice on the estate, but I was not prepared for how low they were willing to sink. A high-pitched, desperate yowl pierced the silence of the house. It wasn't human. It was Luna. Luna was a rescue cat Marcus had brought home during a blizzard 3 years ago. She was skittish, terrified of loud noises, and strictly an indoor cat. To me, she was the last living thing in this house that didn't look at me with calculation or malice. I scrambled out of the chair and ran into the hallway following the sound of her distress. It was coming from the back of the house. I sprinted down the stairs, skipping steps, fear clutching my throat tighter than any threat Chad could have uttered. I burst through the French doors leading to the stone patio. The midday sun was blazing, a rare heat wave for this time of year, turning the concrete into a frying pan. Sitting in the middle of the patio, fully exposed to the relentless glare of the sun, was a small rusted dog crate. Inside, Luna was panting heavily, her small body pressed against the wire mesh, eyes wide with terror. Sitting in the shade of the pergola just 10 feet away were Bernice and Tanisha. They were drinking iced tea, looking cool and comfortable, completely ignoring the suffering animal in front of them. I ran to the crate, my fingers fumbling with the latch. It was padlocked. I spun around, screaming at them to give me the key. Bernice didn't even flinch. She stirred her tea slowly, the clinking of the ice cubes the only sound besides Luna's labored breathing. "Animals carry diseases," Keisha Bernice said calmly. "I do not want that beast shedding on my furniture. Besides, she looks like she enjoys the fresh air." I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the outdoor fire pit and smashed it against the padlock, but it wouldn't budge. Luna let out a weak cry, her tongue lolling out. She was overheating. Tanisha laughed, scrolling on her phone. "Don't be dramatic. It is just a cat. But you know accidents happen. Sometimes the latch breaks. Sometimes the gate to the alley gets left open. If she got out, she probably wouldn't last an hour with the coyotes in the ravine." Chad stepped out onto the patio, holding the transfer documents and a pen. He walked over to the crate and dangled a small silver key in front of my face. "It is a tragedy, really," he said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "But we can bring her inside right now. Into the air conditioning. Into safety. All you have to do is sign the paper, Keisha. Just acknowledge that I am the interim manager of the restaurant." I looked at Luna. Her breathing was getting shallow. I looked at Chad's smug face, at Bernice's cold indifference. They weren't just thieves, they were monsters. If I refused, they would watch her die just to teach me a lesson. I snatched the papers from Chad's hand. I didn't read them. I slammed them onto the hot outdoor table and scribbled my name so hard, the pen tore through the paper. "There. It is done. Now give me the key." Chad tossed the key into the grass, forcing me to hunt for it on my hands and knees. I found it, unlocked the crate, and pulled Luna into my arms. She was hot to the touch, limp and terrified. I rushed her inside, tears finally streaming down my face. I had given them what they wanted. But as I held my cat under the cool water of the kitchen sink, I made a vow. They had forced my hand today, but they had also removed the last shred of my humanity. I was done playing defense. Tuesday was coming, and I was going to destroy them. I wrapped Luna in a dry towel and placed her in the safety of my walk-in closet with food, water, and a fresh litter box. My hands were no longer shaking. The terror I had felt on the patio watching my pet gasp for air had calcified into a cold, hard resolve. I walked back to my desk, bypassing the pile of forged documents Chad had forced me to sign. Those papers were meaningless. They were based on coercion and fraud, and in my line of work, that made them nothing more than confetti. I pulled up Marcus's call log on the screen again. There was one number that appeared every Tuesday morning at 9 sharp, exactly 5 hours before his visit to the bank. It wasn't saved in his contacts under a name. It was just 10 digits. I picked up my burner phone, a tool of my trade I kept for sensitive investigations, and dialed the number. I expected a receptionist or a voicemail. Instead, on the third ring, a man's voice answered. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask who was calling. He simply said, "Mrs. Jenkins, I wondered how long it would take you to find this number." The voice was deep, authoritative, and terrifyingly calm. It belonged to Julian Thorne, the name I had seen on the encrypted email. I asked him who he was and what business he had with my husband. Thorne didn't deflect. He said, "I am the architect of the safety net Marcus built for you. We have been monitoring the situation since the funeral. We are aware of the probate filing Bernice submitted. We are aware of the temporary freeze on your accounts. It was all anticipated. My grip on the phone tightened. Anticipated. My husband had planned for his own mother to try and starve me out. Thorne corrected me gently. Not planned, Mrs. Jenkins. Predicted. Marcus knew exactly who they were. That is why we created the Tuesday protocol. I asked him what I needed to do. His instructions were precise. Do not fight them on the small things. Let them think they have won. Let them believe the house and the business are within their grasp. But on Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon, you must be at the Sovereign International Bank. Bring the key to box 402, bring the death certificate, and bring them. I hesitated. You want me to bring Bernice? And Chad Thorne's voice dropped an octave, sounding almost like a judge delivering a verdict. Yes. The trust stipulations require all potential claimants to be present for the unveiling. It is not just a reading of a will, Keisha. It is an execution of justice. They need to see it to believe it. He hung up before I could ask another question. The line went dead, leaving me in the silence of my hijacked home. I looked at the calendar. Tuesday was 48 hours away. I had to survive 2 more days of their torment. I had to play the defeated widow. I had to let Tanisha paint over my walls and let Chad drive my husband's car. But as I set the phone down, a smile touched my lips for the first time in days. They thought they were circling a wounded gazelle. They had no idea they were walking directly into the lion's den. I walked to the mirror and wiped the tear tracks from my face. It was showtime. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen with puffy eyes and slumped shoulders, wearing the same bathrobe I had worn for 2 days. I looked like a woman who had finally been broken by grief and pressure, which was exactly the performance they wanted to see. Bernice was at the island organizing a stack of real estate brochures for luxury condos downtown, clearly planning her new life with my husband's money. Chad was leaning against the counter, still smug from our conversation about the fake photo. I poured myself a cup of coffee, letting my hand tremble visibly so the cup rattled against the saucer. I cleared my throat, making my voice sound thin and brittle. You win, I whispered, staring down at the black liquid. I cannot fight you anymore. The house, the restaurant, the accounts. Take it all. I just want this to be over. I want to mourn my husband without being threatened in my own home. The reaction was immediate. Bernice dropped the brochure she was holding, a shark-like grin spreading across her face. She walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder, not in comfort, but in possession. Oh, Keisha, honey, this is for the best. You are making the righteous choice. We never wanted to fight you. We just wanted what belongs to the Jenkins bloodline. You are young. You can start over somewhere simpler. Chad pushed a pen toward me across the granite countertop, eager to seal the deal right then and there. Just sign the transfer deed now and we can call off the lawyers. But I shook my head, pulling the robe tighter around me. No, not today. I need to do this properly. Marcus wanted us all to go to the bank on Tuesday. I will sign everything immediately after we leave the vault. Consider it my final act of respect for his wishes. After that, I will pack my bags and go. Tanisha, who had just walked in scrolling on her phone, looked up with a sneer. Why wait? Just sign it and get out. But Bernice silenced her with a sharp look. Let the girl have her moment, Tanisha. Tuesday is fine. What difference does 48 hours make when we are talking about a lifetime of security? She turned back to me, her voice dripping with condescension. We will drive to the bank together on Tuesday, Keisha. Like a family. And then we can all move on. I nodded weakly and shuffled back toward the stairs, clutching my coffee like a lifeline. As I turned the corner, I heard Chad whisper, I told you she would crack. She doesn't have the stomach for a war. I allowed myself a small, cold smile that they couldn't see. They thought I was retreating to lick my wounds. In reality, I was retreating to sharpen my knife. They had just agreed to walk willingly into the trap, convinced they were being led to a coronation. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. The grandfather clock in the foyer struck 3 times, signaling the witching hour. I had been lying awake in the guest room for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the rhythm of the house to settle into deep sleep. Bernice snored with a heavy, rhythmic rattle that I could hear through the walls, and Chad had passed out on the leather sofa downstairs after drinking the rest of Marcus's scotch. That left Tanisha. She was a night owl, usually scrolling social media until dawn, but tonight the blue light from under her door had finally gone dark. It was time to move. I slipped out of bed dressed in black yoga pants and a long-sleeve shirt, my bare feet making no sound on the carpet. In my pocket, I carried 3 high-fidelity audio transmitters. They were not the cheap spy gadgets you buy online. These were professional-grade bugs used in corporate espionage, smaller than a dime, and capable of picking up a whisper from 20 feet away. I had retrieved them from my Pelican case, synced them to a secure server, and tested the frequency. Tonight, the walls of my own home were going to start talking back to me. I moved down the spiral staircase like a shadow, skipping the 3rd step that always creaked. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a stark contrast to the cold calculation in my mind. This was high-stakes poker, and if I got caught creeping around at 3 in the morning with surveillance equipment, their narrative of me being unstable would turn into me being dangerous. I reached the dining room first. This was their war room, the place where they spread out documents and plotted my demise over meals I cooked for them. I crawled under the massive oak table, the wood feeling cool against my cheek. I peeled the adhesive backing off the first transmitter and pressed it firmly against the underside of the table right where Bernice usually sat. 1 down. I moved to the living room, aiming for the underside of the coffee table near the fireplace where Chad liked to hold court. I was just reaching out to plant the second device when the kitchen light flooded the hallway. I froze. The sudden brightness was blinding. Footsteps slapped against the tile floor, lazy and shuffling. It was Tanisha. I scrambled backward, rolling my body behind the large wingback armchair, just as she walked into the living room. I pressed my hand over my mouth, my lungs burning with the need to exhale. Tanisha wasn't just getting water, she was wandering. She walked right past the chair where I was hiding, so close I could smell the stale wine on her breath. She stopped at the coffee table right where I needed to be. "Where is the remote?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. She kicked at the rug, her foot landing inches from my hand. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying she wouldn't look down. If she saw me curled up in a ball behind the chair in the middle of the night, there was no lie in the world that could explain it. She groaned, gave up on the remote, and turned back toward the kitchen. The moment the fridge door opened, masking the sound of my movement, I lunged forward. I stuck the device under the coffee table and rolled back into the shadows, just as the fridge door slammed shut. Tanisha walked back past me, a bottle of water in hand, and trudged up the stairs. I waited 10 full minutes in the dark, shaking from the adrenaline, before I planted the final bug in the hallway. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the prey to speak. The guest room was pitch black, save for the single red LED on my audio receiver, which blinked in rhythm with the raucous laughter exploding in my headphones. Downstairs, my husband's family was throwing a victory party on his grave. Through the high-fidelity transmitters I had planted hours earlier, the sounds of their celebration were crystal clear. I could hear the wet pop of a cork being pulled from a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon, another treasure from Marcus's cellar that they had no right to touch. I sat motionless in the ergonomic chair, my eyes closed, letting their greed wash over me like a toxic wave. I was not just listening. I was recording. Every clink of a glass and every slur of a word was being digitized and stored on 3 separate cloud servers. Chad's voice boomed through the left earpiece, thick with alcohol and arrogance. "I told you she would fold. You saw her face yesterday. She looked like a kicked puppy. Women like Keisha always talk big until you show them a little muscle." He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "I bet she is upstairs right now, packing her polyester suits into cardboard boxes." I tightened my grip on the armrest but remained silent. Let him think it was his intimidation tactics that broke me. His delusion was my camouflage. Tanisha chimed in, her voice shrill with excitement. I am calling the contractors tomorrow morning. I want this dark wood paneling gone immediately. We are going to paint everything white and gold. Real marble floors in the entryway, too. None of this rustic charm nonsense Marcus liked. We are going to make this place look like a palace. She paused, the sound of chewing audible in my ear. And I am taking the master suite. Obviously. I need the walk-in closet for my inventory. Mom, you can take the guest wing. It is quieter there. Bernice hummed in agreement, the sound vibrating in my skull. I do not care which room I get as long as that girl is gone. It feels like the air is finally clearing up in here. You know, I always hated how she looked at us. Like she was better than us just because she had a degree and a job. Well, look who is sitting at the head of the table now. She tapped a glass with a spoon, demanding attention. A toast. To the Jenkins family, to taking back what belongs to us, and to Marcus for finally being useful to his mother, even if he had to die to do it. The cruelty of her toast sucked the air out of my lungs. She wasn't grateful for his life. She was grateful for his death. I opened my eyes and looked at the waveform on my computer screen, the spikes of their laughter jagged and sharp. They were eating food paid for with my credit, drinking wine, bought with my husband's labor, and planning a future funded by a theft they hadn't yet committed. I reached out and adjusted the volume knob, not to turn it down, but to turn it up. I wanted to hear every single word. I wanted to burn their voices into my memory so that when I destroyed them tomorrow, I wouldn't feel a single ounce of mercy. Enjoy the lobster, Bernice. It is the last expensive meal you will ever eat. The silence in my headphones was heavy, broken only by the sound of ice cubes rattling in a glass. Downstairs, the celebration had shifted from raucous to conspiratorial. I watched the audio waveform on my monitor settle into a lower, more rhythmic pattern. Bernice was holding court, and the alcohol had loosened her tongue enough to let the truth slip out. I pressed the headset tighter against my ears, needing to catch every syllable of the venom she was about to spill. You know, Chad, Bernice's voice crackled through the transmitter, slightly slurred, but terrifyingly lucid. People think I hated Keisha because she was poor. That is not it. I have known plenty of poor girls who know their place. I hated her because she is too smart. She thinks. She calculates. I watched her read that prenup 5 years ago. She didn't just sign it like a love-struck fool. She read every clause. That is when I knew she was dangerous. I heard Chad grunt in agreement, the sound of a lighter flicking open, followed by a long exhale. Yeah, she has those eyes. Like she is scanning a barcode on your forehead. But she is broken now, Bernice. You saw her. She is done. Bernice let out a low, dark chuckle. Good. I need a daughter-in-law who nods and breeds, not one who audits. Marcus was weak for her. He let her think she was an equal partner. He forgot that a man's first duty is to the woman who gave him life, not the one who warms his bed. That is why I had to lean on him so hard. If I hadn't reminded him of his obligations, he would have spent every dime on her and left the church out in the cold. This was it, the pivot point. I held my breath. Chad asked the question I had been dying to have answered. So the money in the vault, the 500,000, was that really just a gift? There was a pause, a long, pregnant silence where I could almost hear the gears turning in Bernice's head. Then she lowered her voice to a whisper that the high-gain microphone picked up perfectly. It wasn't a gift, you idiot. It was insurance. 3 years ago, there was a discrepancy in the Grace Tabernacle building fund. The roof needed fixing, but I needed a new Lexus. The Lord provides, but sometimes I had to help him along. I borrowed about 60,000 from the collection plate. I meant to put it back. My stomach churned. She wasn't just a narcissist. She was a felon. Bernice continued, her voice devoid of shame. The auditors were coming. I told Marcus. He was furious. He screamed at me for an hour, but in the end he did what a good son does. He covered it up. He paid the church back anonymously and set up that safety deposit box to hold a reserve fund. He told me he was putting cash in there every Tuesday to bail me out if I ever got sloppy again. He called it the Filial Piety Fund, but I know what it really was. It was hush money. He was paying to keep his mother out of handcuffs. I sat back in my chair, tears springing to my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of clarity. Marcus hadn't been hiding money from me because he didn't trust me. He was hiding it to protect me from the shame of his mother's crimes. He had been carrying the weight of her sin for years, visiting that bank every week, not to build a nest egg for her, but to maintain the cage he had built around her greed. And tomorrow, I was going to unlock that cage and let the whole world see the monster inside. Bernice thought she was inheriting a fortune. What she was actually inheriting was her own criminal record. Bernice's heavy footsteps finally faded up the stairs, followed by the definitive click of her bedroom door closing. The matriarch had gone to sleep, believing she was the queen of the castle, secure in her victory. But down in the living room, the two people she trusted most were about to stick a knife in her back. I adjusted the frequency on my receiver, isolating the voices of Tanisha and Chad. The audio was crisp, picking up even the sound of Tanisha scrolling through her phone while Chad paced the floor. "Is she finally gone?" Tanisha asked, her voice dripping with irritation. "God, I thought she would never shut up about the church fund. If I have to hear one more story about how she sacrificed for Marcus, I am going to scream. She acts like she is the only one who lost a son, but she forgets I lost a brother who paid my credit card bills." Chad let out a low, dark laugh. He poured another drink, the liquid sloshing recklessly into the glass. "Let her talk, Tanisha. Let her feel important for one more day. Because once that safe deposit box opens and the cash is in hand, things are going to change. We cannot let her control that money. You know that, right? If Bernice gets her hands on 500 grand, she will donate half of it to that pastor to buy her way into heaven and waste the rest on ugly hats. We need that capital for us. For the business. For the brand." I listened as the silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken malice. Then Tanisha spoke, her voice lower, calculating. "So what is the plan, Chad? We can't just take it from her. She is the mother. She will guilt-trip us until we die." Chad's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that chilled my blood. "We don't take it. We manage it. I have already looked into it. Once the money is secured, we file for power of attorney. We use her grief against her. We say she is slipping, confused, too emotional to handle financial decisions. I found this facility in Stone Mountain. It is called Golden Years. It is affordable, Tanisha. Very affordable. That means more equity stays with us. We put her there for her own safety, of course. We visit on Sundays. She gets a bed and 3 meals, and we get the liquidity we need to actually live." There was a pause. I waited for Tanisha to defend her mother. I waited for her to be outraged that her husband was suggesting locking the woman who raised her in a budget nursing home just to steal her inheritance. Instead, Tanisha let out a sigh of relief. "You know she has been forgetting things lately, and she is so volatile. Maybe you are right. She needs professional care. We can turn her room into a guest suite for my investors. It really is the best solution for everyone." I sat in the dark, disgusted, but grimly satisfied. They were sharks eating their own. Bernice had raised a daughter exactly in her own image, selfish and heartless, and now that training was coming back to bite her. They were planning to imprison the woman who had just helped them destroy me. I saved the recording to a separate file titled Poetic Justice. When I dropped the hammer tomorrow, I wasn't just saving myself. I was saving Bernice from the very monster she had created, though she would never thank me for it. They deserved each other, but unfortunately for them, I was about to ensure they all ended up with exactly nothing. The vintage leather weekender bag open on the bed was not being filled with clothes for a retreat, but with the arsenal I would need to reclaim my life. I moved through the guest room with the precision of a soldier preparing for deployment, packing the matte black Pelican case containing my forensic workstation. I patted it carefully with a few cashmere sweaters I had salvaged from the hallway floor, treating the machine with more tenderness than anyone in this house had shown me all week. Next went the flash drives labeled and encrypted, containing the audio recordings of their conspiracy and the digital trail of their financial crimes. These were not just storage devices, they were the keys that would lock the door on this chapter of my life forever. The house was eerily silent, the kind of heavy quiet that precedes a tornado. Downstairs, the predators were sleeping, dreaming of spending money that belonged to a ghost. I walked to the window and looked out at the streetlights, casting long orange shadows on the driveway. It was the same driveway where Marcus used to park his Porsche, whistling as he walked to the front door to greet me. The memory didn't bring tears this time. It brought clarity. For days I had felt like a victim tossed around by the whims of people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their payday. But tonight, standing in the dark, I realized I was not the victim. I was the executor. I turned back to the nightstand where I had placed a small silver-framed photograph of Marcus. It was taken on our honeymoon in Bora Bora. He was laughing, windblown and carefree, looking at me with a love that felt tangible even through the glass. I picked it up, tracing the line of his jaw with my thumb. Bernice had tried to rewrite his history. She had painted him as a dutiful son who secretly resented his wife, a man who built a shrine of cash to honor his mother. But I knew the truth now. The filial piety fund wasn't a shrine, it was a ransom payment. He hadn't gone to that bank every Tuesday to worship her. He had gone to keep her darkness from swallowing us whole. I felt a surge of fierce protectiveness rise in my chest. They had tarnished his memory, twisted his kindness into weakness, and used his death as a stepping stone. Tomorrow I wasn't just going to save myself, I was going to restore his dignity. I placed the photo gently into the side pocket of the bag right next to the broken locket Tanisha had destroyed. I zipped the bag shut, the sound sharp and final in the quiet room. I lay down on top of the covers, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the curtains. My heart was beating slow and steady. There was no fear left in me, only a cold, crystalline focus. I whispered into the silence, my voice steady and sure. I see what you did, Marcus. I see the safety net you wove while I was sleeping. Tomorrow I am going to pull the string, and I promise you, I will make you proud. The sun began to rise, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Tuesday had arrived. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast and an overwhelming amount of gardenia perfume. It was Tuesday morning, the day Bernice had anointed as her coronation, and she was dressed for the part. She sat at the head of the island, wearing a navy blue suit with gold buttons that strained against the fabric, topped with a hat so wide it required its own zip code. She wasn't dressed for a bank meeting, she was dressed for a victory lap. Tanisha was next to her, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors to hide the bags under her eyes from the late-night celebration, while Chad paced the floor in a suit that he had clearly dry-cleaned just for this occasion. They looked like a gang of high-end thieves about to pull off a heist, which in their minds was exactly what they were doing. I walked in wearing a simple black dress and a gray cardigan. I made myself look small, faded, and defeated. It was the perfect camouflage. I poured a cup of coffee, my movements slow and deliberate, feeling 3 pairs of eyes tracking me like laser sights. Bernice didn't say good morning. She simply tapped her manicured fingernail against the granite counter, a sharp clicking sound that demanded attention. "Sit down, Keisha," she commanded, though she didn't offer me a chair. She just wanted me to stop moving so she could deliver her sermon. "We need to get the ground rules straight before we leave this house. Today is about family business, real family business. When we get to the bank, you are not to speak. You are not to ask questions. You are not to make a scene. You are there for one purpose only: to provide the biometric verification and to sign the release forms." She took a sip of her tea, her eyes cold and hard over the rim of the cup. "You are the transportation, Keisha. Nothing more. You drive us there. You open the door and you stand in the back while the adults handle the assets. Do you understand me?" I do not want you embarrassing us in front of the bank manager with your weeping or your pleading. This is a business transaction. I looked at her, forcing my face to remain impassive. She thought she was demoting me to a chauffeur. She had no idea she was giving the keys to the executioner. I nodded slowly, looking down at my shoes to hide the spark of defiance in my eyes. I understand, Bernice, I said softly. I will just drive. I won't say a word. Chad let out a snort of approval. Good. At least she knows her place now. He checked his watch, a gold imitation Rolex that he probably bought on the street. Let's go. The Porsche is in the driveway. I want to get there early. I want to see the look on the manager's face when we walk in. I picked up the keys to the SUV, not the Porsche. We are taking my car, I said quietly. The Porsche is a two-seater, unless you want to strap Bernice to the roof. Tanisha stifled a giggle, but Bernice just glared. Fine. Just bring the car around. And don't keep us waiting. I walked out the back door into the cool morning air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the oxygen I would need for the battle ahead. They wanted me to be the silent driver. I would be silent, all right. Silent as the grave they were digging for themselves. I started the engine, and as the car hummed to life, I whispered to the empty passenger seat, "Get in, Marcus. We are going for a ride." At the last second, Chad had snatched the keys from my hand in the driveway, sneering that he didn't trust a grieving widow behind the wheel of a luxury SUV on the highway. So I was relegated to the back seat, squeezed next to Tanisha, while Bernice rode shotgun like the Queen Mother. The drive to the financial district was less of a commute and more of a hostage situation. Chad drove with a terrifying mix of aggression and incompetence, weaving through morning traffic while whistling that same irritating tune he had been humming since the funeral. He treated my car the way he treated everything else, with zero respect, and a heavy foot braking hard at red lights just to feel the lurch of the engine. Beside me, Tanisha was constructing her digital fantasy. She had her phone propped up on the back of Bernice's headrest, the ring light attached to the case blinding me every time she shifted. She was live streaming to her 3,000 followers, her voice pitched an octave higher than normal. "Hey guys, happy Tuesday. Just heading downtown for some major family business. Big moves happening. We are talking generational wealth vibes. Stay tuned for the unboxing of my new life." She winked at the camera, angling her face to catch the light, completely ignoring the fact that she was sitting next to the woman whose husband had just died to make this wealth vibe possible. Bernice ignored the phone, too busy micromanaging Chad's driving, while simultaneously pre-spending the money in her head. "Turn left here, Chad. I want to drive past the Mercedes dealership on the way back." I saw a pearl-white sedative that would look dignified for church, and remind me to ask the banker about wire transfer limits. I don't want to wait 3 days to move the funds to my personal account. I sat in the corner, pressing my body against the door to put as much distance between myself and Tanisha as possible. I wore oversized black sunglasses, not to hide tears, but to hide the look of absolute contempt in my eyes. The car smelled of Bernice's overpowering gardenia perfume and Tanisha's cheap vanilla body spray, a suffocating cocktail that made the air feel thick and heavy. Every time Chad swerved or honked at a pedestrian, I clenched my jaw, reminding myself that this ride was the final price of admission. Tanisha turned the camera toward me suddenly. And here is Keisha. She is a little camera shy today, overwhelmed by the blessings, right, girl? She laughed, a cruel, performative sound. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn away. I just stared straight ahead through my dark lenses, motionless as a statue. To her followers, I probably looked catatonic. In reality, I was meditating on the destruction that was about to unfold. We turned the final corner, and the looming black silhouette of the Meridian Citadel rose up against the skyline. It looked like a fortress. Chad let out a low whistle. "Mama, look at that place. That smells like money." I looked out the window and thought, "No, Chad. That smells like justice." The massive glass doors of the Meridian Citadel slid open with a hushed, expensive whisper, admitting us into a lobby that felt less like a bank and more like a temple. The air was frigid and smelled of lemon oil and old money. The floor was a seamless expanse of black marble that reflected our silhouettes like dark ghosts. Bernice marched in first, her heels clicking aggressively against the stone, her chin held high as if she were the Queen of England visiting the colonies. Chad and Tanisha flanked her, looking around with hungry eyes, already calculating the net worth of the chandeliers. I trailed behind the silent ghost, clutching my handbag, which contained nothing but a tube of lipstick and the death of their dreams. We hadn't taken 3 steps when a man emerged from the frosted glass doors at the far end of the atrium. He was an older gentleman, impeccably dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Chad's entire car. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who controlled billions, not millions. 2 security guards in tactical gear trailed discreetly behind him. Bernice stopped dead in her tracks, a smug smile spreading across her face. She adjusted her hat, preening like a peacock. She whispered loudly to Tanisha, "See, they know who we are. That must be the vice president coming to escort us. Protocol, Tanisha. It is all about protocol." She stepped forward, extending her hand in a grand sweeping gesture, ready to receive her homage. "Good morning," she announced, her voice booming in the quiet space. "I am Bernice Jenkins, the mother of the deceased. We are here to access the vault." The man didn't even blink. He didn't slow down. He didn't look at her hand. He walked past Bernice as if she were a potted plant in the hallway. The wind from his passing disturbed the brim of her hat. He walked past Chad, who had puffed out his chest to look intimidating. He walked past Tanisha, who was trying to find a good lighting angle. He walked straight to me. He stopped 2 feet in front of me and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, his voice deep and warm. "I am Arthur Sterling, the Regional Director of Private Wealth. Please accept my deepest condolences on your loss. Marcus was a remarkable man, and it was an honor to serve him." The silence that followed was deafening. Bernice stood frozen, her hands still extended into empty air, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Chad looked from the director to me, confusion knitting his brows. I looked at Mr. Sterling and saw the glint of recognition in his eyes. He knew. He knew everything. I extended my hand and he took it in both of his. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I said softly, my voice steady. "I appreciate you meeting us personally." Bernice finally found her voice shrill and indignant. "Excuse me, sir. I am the mother. I am the one filing the probate claim." "Why are you talking to the driver?" Mr. Sterling turned to her slowly, his expression shifting from warmth to glacial indifference. "Madam at the Meridian, we do not speak to claimants. We speak to the account holders, and Mrs. Jenkins is the only person on this list I recognize." He gestured toward the secure elevators. "Shall we? The vault is prepared." I stepped forward, leaving Bernice to scramble behind me, her heels clicking frantically to catch up to the woman she thought she owned. The elevator descent was smooth but interminable. We were not just going to the basement. We were traveling deep into the bedrock of the city, leaving the world of sunlight and cell service far behind. I watched the digital floor indicator tick past sub-level 3, the numbers glowing an ominous red in the brushed steel cabin. Tanisha held her phone up, waving it frantically in the air. No signal, she hissed, her voice sounding small in the confined space. "I cannot believe this. How am I supposed to stream the unboxing if I cannot go live?" Bernice slapped her hand down. "Put that thing away, Tanisha. Focus. We are entering the inner sanctum. Act like you belong here." But even Bernice looked unsettled. She was clutching her purse so tightly, her knuckles were white, the air pressure change in her ears, making her swallow repeatedly. When the doors finally slid open, we weren't greeted by a room, but by a fortress. The hallway was lined with gunmetal gray steel, illuminated by harsh recessed lighting that left no shadows. At the end of the corridor stood a checkpoint that looked more like a military black site than a bank. Mr. Sterling led us forward, his shoes clicking rhythmically on the polished concrete. 2 armed guards with assault rifles stood motionless by the heavy blast doors. Chad, who had been swaggering in the lobby, suddenly looked very small. I saw a bead of sweat trickle down his temple, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. He was looking around nervously, his eyes darting from the cameras in the ceiling to the weapons on the guard's hips. "This is heavy," Chad whispered, leaning in close to Bernice. "I mean, I have seen bank vaults, Mama, but this is different. You don't put cash behind 3 inches of ballistic steel and retinal scanners. Cash is bulky, cash takes up space." Bernice hissed at him to be quiet, but Chad couldn't stop. He was vibrating with a mix of fear and greed. "It has to be diamonds," he muttered, his voice trembling with excitement. "Or bearer bonds. Gold bullion. Something compact. Something worth millions. Marcus must have been sitting on a dragon's hoard." Mr. Sterling stopped at the primary checkpoint. He placed his hand on a biometric scanner and waited for the laser to sweep his iris. A heavy mechanical clank echoed through the hallway as the first set of bolts retracted. "Please step into the airlock one at a time," he instructed, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "No electronic devices. No recording equipment." As I stepped through the scanner, the green light washing over me, I looked back at them. They were huddled together, eyes wide, calculating the imaginary fortune that lay ahead. Chad was wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers, already spending the diamonds he had invented in his head. They were terrified of the security, awed by the power it represented. They didn't understand that the thickest walls aren't built to keep people out. They are built to keep secrets in. And the secret waiting for them behind that final door was heavier than any gold bar. I cleared the checkpoint and waited for them to join me, standing before the massive circular vault door that looked like the entrance to a missile silo. The air was cold, recycled, and smelled of ozone. The final barrier was about to fall. The massive circular door of the main vault swung open with a silence that defied its weight, revealing a room that looked less like a storage facility and more like a morgue for billionaires. Walls of brushed stainless steel rose from the floor to the ceiling, lined with thousands of numbered drawers. The air inside was significantly colder than the hallway, a temperature controlled to preserve paper and precious metals, but it felt like the chill of a tomb. Mr. Sterling walked briskly down the third aisle, his footsteps echoing sharply against the metal. Bernice, Chad, and Tanisha followed him like a pack of starving wolves, trailing a scent, their eyes darting frantically across the numbers. 300, 350, 400. Mr. Sterling stopped in front of a box at eye level. "Number 402. He turned to me, extending a gloved hand. "The key, Mrs. Jenkins." The silence in the room was absolute. I reached into my purse, bypassing the tissue packet and the lip balm, and pulled out the heavy brass key with the intricate teeth. It felt warm in my hand, the only warm thing in this frozen underworld. As I handed it to him, I saw Bernice twitch. She wanted to snatch it. She wanted to be the one to turn the lock, but she couldn't move. She was paralyzed by the proximity of the fortune she had spent years coveting. Mr. Sterling inserted his master key into the left lock, and then my key into the right. He turned them simultaneously. The mechanism clicked, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the steel walls. He slid the long rectangular metal cassette out of the wall. It was gray, nondescript, and terrifyingly ordinary. Chad leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Is it heavy?" he whispered hoarsely. "Does it feel heavy?" Mr. Sterling ignored him. He carried the box to a small, polished mahogany table in the center of the viewing area. He placed it down gently as if it contained a bomb. The family gathered around the table, practically vibrating with greed. Tanisha had lowered her phone, her breath hitching in her throat. Bernice was gripping the edge of the table so hard, her fingernails were scratching the varnish. This was it, the moment of truth, the filial piety fund, the $500,000, the diamonds, the gold. Mr. Sterling stepped back, clasping his hands behind his back. "The box is yours, Mrs. Jenkins." Bernice didn't wait. She didn't offer a prayer or a moment of silence for her son. She lunged at the lid, throwing it back with a violence that shook the table. She looked down, her mouth already open in a smile of triumph. But the smile froze. It curdled into a mask of confusion, then horror. The box was not filled with stacks of $100 bills. It did not sparkle with diamonds. It was 90% air. Lying flat on the bottom of the cold metal container were two solitary items, a single red USB drive, and a thin manila file folder. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. The reality refused to compute in their brains. They had built a castle on the foundation of this money, and the foundation had just vanished. Then the explosion happened. Bernice let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a guttural shriek of pure, unadulterated rage. She grabbed the box and turned it upside down, shaking it violently. Nothing fell out but the folder, and the drive clattering pitifully onto the wood. "Where is it?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Where is the money? This is a trick." She looked at Mr. Sterling, her eyes bulging. "You stole it. You bank people stole it. My son put cash in here every week, $500,000. Where is my money?" Chad was frantically patting down the empty box, running his hands along the lining as if the cash were invisible or hidden in a secret compartment. "This is impossible," he stammered, his face draining of color. "We saw the GPS. We saw the schedule. He came here. He had to put something here." Tanisha just stared at the empty metal coffin, her dreams of a new studio and a luxury car evaporating into the sterile air. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, his face a mask of professional boredom. "Madam, I assure you, the contents of this box have not been accessed since Mr. Jenkins's last visit on Tuesday. What you see is exactly what he intended you to find." I stood at the back of the group watching their world collapse. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I just looked at the red USB drive. I knew exactly what was on it. Marcus hadn't left them a fortune. He had left them a mirror. And they were about to be forced to look at their own ugly reflections. Bernice was hyperventilating now, clutching her chest, screaming about lawsuits and theft. I walked past her, calm and steady, and picked up the red drive. It felt light in my hand, but I knew it carried the weight of 1,000 sins. I looked at Bernice, who was sobbing over the empty metal box. "It is not missing, Bernice," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "It was never here." Bernice's accusations of theft were cut short by the sharp metallic click of Mr. Sterling placing a slim laptop on the mahogany table. He didn't speak. He simply turned the screen toward us and gestured for me to insert the red USB drive. The room was suffocatingly tense, the air thick with the remnants of Bernice's hysteria and the cold dread of the unknown. I took the drive, my fingers brushing against the port. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing this to hear his voice one last time. I pushed the drive in. A file window popped up instantly. A single video file named The Truth. I double-clicked. The screen flickered to black, and then there he was. Marcus. He was sitting in his study, the same study they had ransacked just days ago, wearing his favorite navy blue sweater, the one with the frayed cuff. He looked healthy. He looked tired, but he looked alive. Seeing him moving, breathing, blinking on that screen felt like a physical blow to my chest. A small sob escaped my throat before I could catch it. Bernice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tanisha froze, her eyes wide and terrified. "Hey, Keisha," Marcus said from the screen, his voice warm and intimate, as if he were speaking only to me. He leaned into the camera, his eyes sad. "If you are watching this, baby, I'm sorry. It means I'm gone. And I'm sorry I left you alone with them." He looked down at his hands for a moment, then looked back up, his expression hardening. The warmth vanished, replaced by a steely resolve I rarely saw him direct at his family. "Mom, Tanisha, Chad, if you are seeing this video, it means you are in the vault. And if you are in the vault, it means you didn't listen to my will. It means you didn't respect my wife. It means you dragged Keisha down here, probably bullying her, probably threatening her, convinced that I was hiding a pot of gold for you." Bernice made a choking sound, shaking her head as if to deny the accusation coming from her dead son. But Marcus continued, his voice echoing in the steel room. There is no money in this box, Mom. There is no filial piety fund. There are no diamonds. There is no secret fortune. He leaned back in his chair, sighing deeply. You want to know why I came to the bank every Tuesday? You want to know what I did for those 2 hours? I sat in a private viewing room, and I read. He held up a paperback book to the camera. I read books. I listened to jazz. I sat in silence. I paid for this safety deposit box just to rent a few cubic feet of air where you couldn't call me, where you couldn't ask me for money, where you couldn't critique my marriage or my life. I didn't come here to build you a nest egg, Mom. I came here to escape you. The silence in the vault was absolute. It was heavier than the steel door. Tanisha looked like she might be sick. Chad was staring at his shoes, unable to look at the man on the screen. Bernice was trembling, tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of humiliation. I loved you, Mom, Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. I tried to be the good son. I paid your debts. I covered your mistakes at the church. I bought you the cars and the clothes. I spent 20 years trying to fill the hole inside you with money, but I finally realized it's a bottomless pit. You drained me. You drained my spirit. And I knew that when I died, you would try to drain Keisha too. He pointed a finger at the camera, his eyes blazing. That is why I set this up. The Tuesday protocol wasn't to give you money, it was to give you a reality check. You are looking at an empty box because you have already taken everything I had to give. The only thing I have left is for my wife. Marcus softened again, looking back at the lens with that familiar, gentle smile. Keisha, the file in the folder is for you. It's the only thing that matters. I love you. Don't let them break you. You are the only real family I ever had. The screen went black. The video ended. And for the first time in her life, Bernice Jenkins had absolutely nothing to say. The video file ended, but the silence in the vault was almost immediately broken by the sound of Mr. Sterling sliding the manila folder across the polished table. It came to rest directly in front of Bernice. She stared at it as if it were a venomous snake, her hands trembling too violently to reach out. Open it, Mr. Sterling said, his voice devoid of warmth. It is the second part of Mr. Jenkins's statement. When she didn't move, I reached past her and flipped the cover open. Inside, there were no bearer bonds or stock certificates. There were copies of wire transfers, legal settlements, and police reports, all stapled together in neat, damning chronological order. A second video file on the laptop automatically queued up. Marcus appeared again, but this time the camera angle was different. He was holding a stack of papers, the same papers that now lay on the table. Let's go through the ledger, Marcus said from the screen, his tone shifting from sadness to the cold, hard precision of an accountant. You all thought I came to the bank on Tuesdays to deposit cash. You were half right. I did come to handle cash. I came to withdraw it. Large, untraceable sums that I needed to clean up the messes you made before they destroyed our family name. He held up the first document. The date was stamped clearly at the top 2 years ago. This is for you, Mom. The Grace Tabernacle Roof Fund. You told the deacons that the $25,000 went to a contractor who ran off with the money. But we both know there was no contractor. You wired that money to a casino in Atlantic City to cover a marker you couldn't pay. Bernice let out a strangled gasp, her face turning an ashen gray. On the screen, Marcus continued, his eyes boring into hers. The church was going to press charges, Mom. Embezzlement. Elder Smith called me. He was ready to go to the police. I came to this vault, took out $25,000 of my own savings, and drove to the rectory to pay him off personally. I bought your reputation back. I bought your freedom, and I never asked you for a dime of it back. I just asked you to stop. But you didn't, did you? He flipped the page. 6 months later. Another $15,000. This time it was the charity gala funds. I paid that too. You aren't standing here today as a wealthy matriarch because of your own virtue, Mom. You are standing here as a free woman because I drained my accounts to keep you out of an orange jumpsuit. Tanisha was shaking her head, backing away from the table, trying to distance herself from her mother's shame. But Marcus wasn't done. He turned his gaze to the lens, and it felt like he was looking directly at his sister. "Don't look so superior, Tanisha. You are next." He held up a photo of a mangled bicycle and a police report. "The incident on 4th Street last year. You told Keisha you were at a spa weekend. You told the insurance company your car was stolen. But you called me at 3 in the morning, crying, slurring your words, terrified because you had hit a college student and driven away." Tanisha let out a sharp cry, clapping her hands over her ears. "No, stop it, turn it off," she shrieked. But the video played on, relentless. Marcus's voice was heavy with fatigue. "It was a felony hit and run, Tanisha, plus a DUI. That would have been 5 years in prison minimum. It would have ended your little influencer career before it started. I hired the best defense attorney in the state. I paid the victim's medical bills. I paid the settlement to seal the record. $80,000, Tanisha. That money came from this vault. It came from the future I was trying to build with my wife." I looked at the documents in the folder. The wire transfer receipts matched his story perfectly. The dates aligned with the Tuesday visits. The mysterious Project Protect K wasn't about a mistress. It was about protecting me from the knowledge that I had married into a family of criminals. He hadn't been hiding a secret life. He had been hiding their secret crimes. Marcus lowered the papers on the screen. "So when you ask where the money is, the answer is simple. You spent it. You are wearing it, Tanisha. You are driving it, Mom. The inheritance you are fighting for is already gone. I spent the last 2 years of my life working double shifts at the restaurant, not to get rich, but to keep you two from being arrested. I paid for your sins with my sweat. And now the account is closed." Mr. Sterling reached out and gently closed the laptop. The silence that followed was total. It was the silence of a vacuum where all the oxygen had been sucked out. Bernice looked at the empty box, then at me, her eyes hollow. She had come here expecting a fortune. Instead, she found a receipt for a life she had squandered. Chad, who had been silent, slowly backed away from the table, realizing that the golden goose hadn't just died. It had been plucked clean years ago. I stood tall, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. They wanted to know what Marcus left behind. He left them their freedom, and that was far more than they deserved. Chad tried to use the shock of the moment to make his escape. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie with a nervous twitch, and took a step toward the heavy steel door. "Well, this is clearly a private family matter," he stammered, his eyes darting between the weeping Bernice and the shell-shocked Tanisha. "I think it is best if I give you all some space. I will just wait in the car." He reached for the door handle, desperate to flee the blast radius of the truth bomb Marcus had just detonated. "Sit down, Chad." My voice wasn't loud, but it whipped through the vault like a lash. I didn't turn to look at him. I was still looking at the folder on the table. "There is one more file here, and this one has your name on it." Chad froze. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry, hacking cough. "Me, come on, Keisha. I am just the brother-in-law. I didn't take any money. Marcus and I were cool. We were partners." I reached into the folder and pulled out a thick stack of documents clipped together with a red warning label. I tossed them onto the table. They slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of him. It was a forensic handwriting analysis report attached to a high-interest loan agreement from a shadow lender known for breaking kneecaps rather than filing lawsuits. "You are right, Chad. You didn't take money from the bank, you took Marcus's identity." I pointed to the signature at the bottom of the loan document. It read, "Marcus Jenkins," but the loop of the J was too wide and the slant was too aggressive. It was a forgery. A good one, but not good enough to fool a forensic accountant. "You took out a $200,000 loan with the Petrovic Syndicate 6 months ago. You used the restaurant as collateral. And you signed Marcus's name." Tanisha looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. "You did what? You put the restaurant up. That is our inheritance, you idiot." Chad's face turned a mottled purple. "That is a lie. Marcus signed that he wanted to invest in my crypto venture. He believed in me." I nodded to Mr. Sterling, who tapped a key on the laptop. A new video window opened. This wasn't a recording of Marcus sitting in his chair. This was security footage from the back office of the restaurant dated 3 months ago. The timestamp in the corner read 11:42 p.m. The image was grainy black and white, but the violence was unmistakable. On the screen, Chad was cornering Marcus against the safe. Chad wasn't the goofy, bumbling leech he pretended to be. He was aggressive, shoving Marcus hard against the wall. We could hear the audio clearly. Chad was screaming, "You have to pay them, Marcus. They are going to kill me. I told them you were the partner. I told them you had the cash." On the screen, Marcus looked calm but tired. He pushed Chad's hands off his chest. "I am not paying your gambling debts, Chad. And I am not letting you destroy my business. I am going to the police." Chad grabbed a heavy liquor bottle from the shelf and smashed it against the desk, brandishing the jagged neck like a weapon. "You go to the police and I will burn this place down with you inside it. You pay the interest, Marcus. You pay it every week or I swear to God accidents will start happening. Maybe to Tanisha. Maybe to that wife of yours." The video froze on Chad's face, twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. In the vault, the real Chad looked like he was about to vomit. He backed away until his back hit the cold steel wall. Bernice stood up slowly. She wiped her face, her expression shifting from humiliation to a cold reptilian fury. She walked over to Chad. "You threatened my son," she whispered. "You threatened to hurt Tanisha." Chad held up his hands. "It wasn't like that, Mama B. I was stressed. I was in a hole." Marcus understood. "He was helping me." "He was paying your blackmail," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. The weekly payments from this vault weren't just for Bernice's theft or Tanisha's accidents. The biggest chunk was going to the Petrovic brothers to keep them from coming after you. Marcus wasn't investing in you. He was paying a ransom to keep you from getting killed, you ungrateful parasite. And the stress, the hypertension, the heart attack that killed him. You loaded the gun. Chad, you might as well have pulled the trigger." Chad looked at Tanisha for support, but she looked at him with pure disgust. "You gambled away my brother's life," she spat. "I picked up the loan document. The principal is still outstanding, Chad. And since Marcus is dead, the loan sharks are going to come looking for the signatory. But guess what? I have already sent this forensic report to the Petrovic brothers. They know Marcus didn't sign it. They know it was you." Chad's knees gave out. He slid down the wall, sliding into a heap on the floor. He knew what that meant. In the world he played in, fraud wasn't punished with a lawsuit. It was punished with blood. He wasn't just broke, he was a dead man walking. And for the first time, looking at the man who had tormented my husband into an early grave, I felt absolutely no pity. The vault was cold, but the justice being served was scorching hot. The vault was silent except for Chad's ragged breathing from the floor where he had collapsed. The air felt thin, stripped of all the oxygen, by the weight of the revelations that had just crushed the Jenkins family. They were broken, terrified, and humiliated, but I knew they were still holding on to one desperate thread of hope: the assets. Even without the cash in the box, they believed the house, the vintage Porsche, and the thriving restaurant were still part of the general estate. They believed that by blood right they were entitled to the physical kingdom Marcus had built. It was time to sever that last thread. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, a sharp sound that snapped Bernice's attention back to the table. He reached into his leather briefcase, which had remained closed until this moment, and pulled out a bound document with a blue cover. It was thick, stamped with the official seal of the state court, and tied with a black ribbon. He placed it in the center of the table, not sliding it this time, but setting it down like a tombstone. Bernice wiped her eyes, her survival instinct kicking in. "Fine," she croaked, her voice trembling. "So there is no cash. We accept that Marcus made poor choices with his money to fix family mistakes, but there is still the matter of the house, and the business. As his mother, I am the next of kin for the real estate. We will sell the restaurant to pay off Chad's mess, and I will move into the house to manage the inventory. We can still salvage this." Mr. Sterling looked at her with an expression that was almost pitying. Madam, you seem to be laboring under a significant misunderstanding regarding the legal status of your son's property. You are speaking of an estate, but there is no estate to probate. Bernice blinked, confused. What do you mean? He is dead. Everything he owned is his estate. Mr. Sterling opened the blue folder to the first page. 2 years ago, on the same day, Mr. Jenkins opened this safety deposit box. He also executed a legal instrument known as the Phoenix Irrevocable Trust. He looked at me, giving a small nod before turning the document toward Bernice. An irrevocable trust is a permanent structure. Once assets are placed into it, they no longer belong to the individual. They belong to the trust, and they cannot be removed, altered, or claimed by creditors or relatives. He pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the page. On that date, Marcus transferred the deed to the residence at Highland Park, the title to the Porsche 911, and 100% of the shares of Jenkins Soul Food Enterprises into the Phoenix Trust. Legally speaking, Marcus died owning nothing but the clothes on his back. Everything else had been owned by the trust for 24 months. Tanisha grabbed the document, her eyes scanning the pages frantically. But who controls the trust? She demanded, her voice shrill. Who is the trustee? If he put it in a trust, the family must be the beneficiaries. Mr. Sterling turned the page to the signature line. The sole trustee and the sole beneficiary of the Phoenix Trust is Mrs. Keisha Jenkins. The silence that followed was total. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hitting the block. Bernice grabbed the edge of the table, swaying as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet. No, she whispered. That is not legal. He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't cut his own mother out. It is marital property. I will contest it. Mr. Sterling closed the folder with a definitive snap. You cannot contest a trust that has been active for 2 years, madam. It is ironclad. We anticipated challenges, which is why Marcus included a specific clause. He opened the folder again, tapping a bolded section. The disinheritance clause. It states that if any family member attempts to challenge the validity of this trust or harass the beneficiary, they are to be immediately severed from any potential goodwill gifts. He looked at Bernice, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. That means, Mrs. Jenkins, that the house you are currently sleeping in does not belong to your son's estate. It belongs to Keisha. The car Chad drove here belongs to Keisha. The restaurant you plan to sell belongs to Keisha. You are not heirs. You are, legally speaking, trespassers. I watched the realization wash over them. It was total devastation. Bernice looked at me, and for the first time I didn't see arrogance. I saw fear. She realized that she wasn't the matriarch anymore. She was a guest who had overstayed her welcome in a house I owned. Tanisha looked at her phone, realizing her unboxing video would never happen because there was nothing to unbox. And Chad, still on the floor, realized he had no collateral to offer the men who were coming to break his legs. I picked up the blue document. It felt heavy, solid, and real. Marcus hadn't just protected me. He had armed me. He knew they would come for me the moment he was gone, so he had removed the battlefield from under their feet before the war even started. I looked at Bernice, who was now weeping softly, a broken old woman in a hat that was too big for her. You wanted the keys to the kingdom, Bernice, I said quietly. But Marcus knew you would burn the kingdom down. So he gave the keys to the only person who helped him build it. I turned to Mr. Sterling. Thank you, Arthur. I think we are done here. I have some evictions to file. I walked out of the vault without looking back, the sound of my heels echoing on the steel floor like the ticking of a clock that had finally run out of time for the Jenkins family. They were left in the cold with the empty metal box while I walked out into the sunlight, owning everything. The silence that followed the revelation of the trust was heavy, broken only by the hum of the air filtration system and Chad's ragged breathing from the floor. He was trying to scramble to his feet, his movements jerky and uncoordinated like a puppet with cut strings. He looked at me with eyes that were no longer arrogant, but pleading, a desperate animal, realizing the trap had shut. He opened his mouth to speak, probably to offer some pathetic deal or beg for a loan to pay off the Petrovic brothers, but I didn't give him the chance. The time for negotiation had ended the night he threatened to burn my husband's legacy to the ground. I turned to Mr. Sterling and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal we had agreed upon before I even stepped foot in the lobby. Sterling pressed a silent alarm button under the lip of the mahogany table, and the heavy steel blast doors at the entrance of the vault corridor hissed open. The sound of heavy boots hitting the concrete floor echoed like thunder. 4 officers in tactical vests emblazoned with Economic Crimes Unit stormed into the viewing room. They didn't look around. They didn't ask questions. They moved with the precision of a strike team that had been briefed on exactly who their target was. Bernice let out a shriek, clutching her chest. "What is happening? Who called the police? We are a respectable family." One of the officers, a tall man with a face carved from granite, stepped over her legs and grabbed Chad by the lapels of his cheap suit, hauling him to his feet. "Chadwick Davis," he barked, his voice bouncing off the steel walls. "You are under arrest." Chad began to thrash, sweat flying from his forehead. "For what? I didn't steal anything. The box is empty. This is a mistake." The officer spun him around and slammed him against the metal wall, the sound of the impact sickeningly loud. He pulled a pair of zip-tie cuffs from his belt. "You are being charged with 3 counts of felony wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and extortion in the 1st degree. We have the forensic accounting reports, the forged loan documents, and the video evidence of you threatening the deceased." The plastic cuffs ratcheted tight around Chad's wrists, biting into the skin. He let out a howl of pain that was more psychological than physical. He looked at Bernice, his eyes wide with terror. "Mama B, do something. Tell them it was a loan. Tell them. Marcus said it was okay." Bernice stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. She was watching her favorite son-in-law, the man she had conspired with, being treated like a common criminal. She knew that if she spoke, if she admitted to knowing about the schemes, she could be next in those cuffs. So she did what she always did. She saved herself. She looked away. The officers began to drag Chad toward the exit. He dug his heels in his shoes, screeching against the floor. "Keisha," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Keisha, please, you can't let them take me. The Russians will get me in jail. You are signing my death warrant." I stood perfectly still, watching him struggle. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched him with the cold detachment of a judge delivering a verdict. "You signed your own warrant, Chad?" I said, my voice cutting through his screams. "You thought you could bully a widow. You forgot that I spent 10 years investigating men smarter than you." The officers hauled him through the doorway, his screams fading as they dragged him down the long steel corridor. The heavy door hissed shut behind them, sealing the sound away. The room fell silent again. I looked at Tanisha and Bernice. They were huddled together, shaking, looking at the space where Chad had just been. They weren't just looking at an empty vault anymore. They were looking at the reality that their protection was gone, their enforcer was incarcerated, and they were alone in a room with the woman they had underestimated. The air felt cleaner already. The steel door had barely clicked shut behind the thrashing figure of Chad before I turned my attention back to the 2 women remaining in the room. The air in the vault was still vibrating with the energy of the arrest, but I did not let the momentum die. I reached into my leather tote bag for the final time. I wasn't pulling out forensic evidence or video files this time. I was pulling out the consequences. I withdrew 2 crisp white envelopes already sealed and addressed. I didn't slide them across the table. I walked around the mahogany surface and placed one directly into Tanisha's trembling hand and the other onto the table in front of Bernice. "What is this?" Tanisha whispered, her voice hitching with the remnants of her tears. She ripped the envelope open, her eyes darting across the single sheet of legal paper inside. Her face, already pale, turned a sickly shade of white. "An eviction notice. You cannot be serious. Keisha, this is my home." "It is not your home." "Tanisha," I corrected her, my voice devoid of any warmth. "It is my property, and according to the terms of the trust, unauthorized occupants are liability risks. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. That means you need to be out by noon tomorrow. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property and donated to charity." Tanisha let out a wail that echoed painfully off the metal walls. She dropped the paper as if it burned her. "Where am I supposed to go? I have inventory in that closet. I have a shoot scheduled for Friday. You are ruining my life." She looked at her mother, desperate for a savior, but Bernice was staring at her own notice, her eyes bulging. Bernice stood up, her chest heaving. She looked at the eviction notice, then at me, and I saw the gears turning in her head. She realized that bullying hadn't worked. She realized that legal threats had failed. So she reached for the weapon she had used to control Marcus for 30 years. Guilt. She suddenly gasped, a loud theatrical sound, and clutched her left arm. "My heart," she moaned, stumbling back against the chair. "Oh Lord, the stress. It is too much. I can't breathe. Keisha, you are killing me." My chest. She slumped sideways, catching herself on the table, trying to slide to the floor in a tragic heap. She looked up at me through fluttering eyelids, waiting for me to rush to her side to apologize, to rip up the eviction notice in a panic. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood with my arms crossed, watching her performance with the boredom of a critic watching a bad play. Tanisha screamed, "Mama! Oh my God, she is having a heart attack! Help her! You have to help her!" Mr. Sterling reached for the phone on the wall, but I held up a hand to stop him. "She is fine, Arthur," I said calmly. Bernice let out another moan, louder this time, trying to sell the agony. "I am dying," she wheezed. "My pills. I need my pills." I took a step closer, looking down at her. "You don't have a heart condition, Bernice. You have acid reflux and a flair for the dramatic. Marcus told me about the time you faked a seizure to get him to miss his college graduation. It didn't work then, and it is not going to work now." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "You can lie on this cold floor all day if you want. But the clock is ticking. You have 24 hours to pack your hats and your cruelty and get out of my house. If you are not gone by noon tomorrow, the sheriff will remove you. And unlike me, he won't be polite about it." Bernice's eyes snapped open. The pain vanished instantly. She glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, realizing her final gambit had failed. She straightened up, smoothing her suit jacket with jerky, angry movements. "You are a cold, heartless woman," she spat. I smiled, a genuine icy smile. "I learned from the best, Bernice. Now if I were you, I would start packing. You have a lot of stolen memories to box up." I turned on my heel and walked toward the elevator, leaving them in the tomb of their own making. The automatic doors of the Meridian Citadel slid shut behind us, severing the cool, hushed atmosphere of the bank from the humid, exhaust-filled air of the parking lot. The sun was blinding, reflecting off the asphalt in shimmering waves of heat that made the world look distorted. Ahead of us, a squad car was already pulling away, its lights flashing silently as it carried Chad off to a booking station. He was gone, erased from the equation, leaving two women standing on the curb, who had suddenly realized they were stranded in every sense of the word. I walked briskly toward my SUV, my keys jingling in my hand, the sound sharp and purposeful. I didn't look back. I had said everything I needed to say in the vault, but Bernice wasn't ready to let go. The sound of her heels clattering frantically on the pavement followed me, desperate and uneven. Just as I reached the driver's side door, a hand clamped around my wrist. It wasn't the imperious, demanding grip she usually used. It was a claw of desperation. "Keisha, wait!" Bernice gasped, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. "You cannot just leave us here. You cannot leave us like this. We don't have a car. Chad has the keys to the sedan. How are we supposed to get home?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, my expression unreadable. I didn't pull away immediately. I just let her hold on, letting her feel the coldness of my skin against her sweating palm. "You can take a taxi, Bernice," I said calmly. "Or perhaps Tanisha can call one of her followers for a ride. I am sure they would love to meet you." Bernice's face crumbled. She tightened her grip, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "Please, Keisha. Don't be cruel. We are family." Think about Marcus. He would not want this. He would want us to be together. We are all he has left. We can fix this. I can help you run the restaurant. We can start over. I let out a short, dry laugh that stopped her mid-sentence. I used my other hand to deliberately peel her fingers off my wrist one by one, as if removing a dirty rag. Family, I repeated, testing the word like it was a piece of rotten fruit. That is a funny word coming from you, Bernice. I took a step closer to her, forcing her to look up at me. You spent 5 years telling anyone who would listen that I was an outsider. You told the church choir I was a charity case. You told the neighbors I was a gold digger. And just last week at the funeral, I heard you tell Tanisha that I was a stranger who didn't deserve the Jenkins name. Bernice opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. You were right, Bernice. I am not a Jenkins. I am the trustee. I am the owner. And you are just a woman who realized too late that she burned the only bridge she had left. You didn't want a daughter-in-law. You wanted a servant. Well, consider this my resignation. I opened the car door and slid into the leather seat, the interior cool and smelling faintly of the vanilla air freshener Marcus had picked out. Bernice banged her fist against the window as I started the engine. Keisha, please open the door. Where will I go? I put the car in reverse and looked at her through the glass one last time. She looked small, old, and incredibly ordinary. The monster that had haunted my marriage was gone, replaced by a pathetic woman standing in the exhaust of a luxury SUV she would never ride in again. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't mouth an apology. I simply backed out of the space, turned the wheel, and drove toward the exit. As I merged into traffic, leaving them shrinking in the rearview mirror, I felt a weight lift from my chest that I hadn't realized I was carrying. I was finally free. I didn't return to the house alone. When I pulled into the driveway, a black sedan was already idling by the curb, flanked by 2 large men in dark suits. They were private security contractors I had hired on the ride home, instructed to ensure that the transition of power was absolute and physical. I unlocked the front door and stood in the foyer checking my watch. The taxi carrying Bernice and Tanisha pulled up moments later, looking garish and cheap against the manicured lawn. They stepped out, looking like refugees from a war. They had started their faces streaked with makeup and sweat. I met them at the threshold. I didn't invite them in. I blocked the way. You have 2 hours, I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. You can take your clothing and your personal toiletries. Anything else, electronics, jewelry, furniture, and luxury goods, stays. If you try to sneak anything out, my associates will search your bags. And if they find stolen property, I will call the police again. Tanisha pushed past me, muttering curses under her breath, and sprinted up the stairs. Bernice followed more slowly, her eyes darting to the silver vase on the entry table, calculating if she could fit it in her purse. One of the guards stepped in front of it, crossing his massive arms. Bernice flinched and hurried toward the guest wing. I followed Tanisha. I found her in the walk-in closet, frantically stuffing a collection of Louis Vuitton and Chanel bags into a large suitcase. She was moving with the desperation of a looter. Tanisha, stop, I said, leaning against the doorframe. She whirled around, clutching a quilted leather clutch to her chest. You can't have these. I bought these. They are mine. I walked over and gently pulled the bag from her grip. She tried to hold on, but I was stronger. You bought these with the supplementary American Express card Marcus gave you for emergencies, I said, examining the logo. I checked the statements, Tanisha. You spent $40,000 on handbags in 3 years while your brother was paying off your hit and run. That card was linked to the business account. These bags are company property. I pointed to the pile on the floor. Leave them, all of them. But I need them, she shrieked, tears springing to her eyes again. I can't be seen with a Target suitcase. My image is everything. Your image is a lie paid for by a dead man, I retorted. Pack your jeans and your t-shirts. The costume party is over. I motioned for the guard to stand in the doorway. He began to collect the designer bags, piling them up like evidence. Tanisha collapsed onto the floor, sobbing into her hands, stripped of the only identity she had ever known. I went downstairs to check on Bernice. She was in the kitchen wrapping a set of crystal wine glasses in a dish towel. "Put them back, Bernice," I said, startling her. She dropped a glass. It shattered on the tile, the sound sharp and final. "Those were a wedding gift," she hissed. "From my sister. They were a gift to the couple," I corrected. "And since you spent the last 5 years trying to break that couple up, you don't get to keep the crystal." I pointed to the door. "Your box is waiting in the hall. It contains your coats and your Bible. I suggest you read the parts about greed and theft while you wait for your ride." 30 minutes later, they stood on the porch. Tanisha was dragging a garbage bag full of clothes. Bernice was clutching a cardboard box. They looked small. They looked ordinary. They looked nothing like the royalty they thought they were. I stood in the doorway, the cool air from the house rushing past me. "Leave the keys," I said. Tanisha threw hers into the bushes. Bernice placed hers on the mat with a trembling hand. I watched them walk down the driveway toward the street, their figures receding into the afternoon heat. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, quiet relief. I stepped back inside and closed the heavy oak door. The lock clicked into place with a sound that felt like the final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. The house was silent, and for the first time since I married Marcus, it finally felt like mine. The silence that wrapped around the house was no longer cold or threatening. It was the silence of a blank page that had been scrubbed clean, ready for new words. I stood in the center of the living room, the former battlefield of my in-laws' gaudy parties and endless arguments. The stench of Bernice's cheap gardenia perfume and the sickly sweet odor of Tanisha's vape smoke still lingered in the air like stubborn ghosts. I threw open every window, letting the afternoon breeze sweep through and drag that filth out. It was time for the final ritual to turn this place back into the sanctuary Marcus and I had built. I gathered everything Tanisha had called art into a pile. The gaudy abstract paintings she bought with embezzled restaurant funds, the cheap faux fur rugs she had thrown over my hardwood floors to hide their beauty. I didn't sell them. I didn't donate them. I tossed them all into the stone fire pit in the backyard. The flames roared to life, licking up the symbols of greed and laziness. I stood there watching the plastic melt and the canvas turn to ash, feeling like I was incinerating the bad memories of the past week. Back inside, I popped the lid on a can of cream white paint, the original color Marcus and I had chosen when we first moved in. I dipped the roller into the tray, the sharp, clean smell of fresh chemicals overpowering the musty scent of betrayal. With every decisive stroke, I erased the stains on the walls, the scuffs left by Chad's luggage, and the faint pencil marks Tanisha had made to mark her territory. Each new coat of paint was a reclamation of sovereignty. The walls turned bright, clean, and pure again. I was washing this house clean inch by inch. My phone buzzed on the table. The screen flashed Arthur Sterling's name. I wiped the sweat from my brow and answered on speaker, keeping my rhythm with the paint roller. Arthur informed me that the legal transfer of the restaurant control was complete and asked what I wanted to do with the surplus capital in the trust. I paused, looking out at the sun-drenched garden. Bernice and her children wanted to use Marcus's money to buy luxury cars and designer bags to cover up the hollowness inside them. They thought money was for consumption. But to me, money was a tool. "Arthur," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I want you to allocate 20% of the restaurant's annual net profit. Establish a scholarship fund in the name of Marcus Jenkins." Arthur hesitated for a moment. "A noble gesture, Mrs. Jenkins. Which university would you like to endow?" "Not a university," I replied. "Wire the money directly to St. Jude's Orphanage on the East Side. Earmark it for textbooks, winter coats, and repairs to the dormitory. That is where I grew up, Arthur. That is where I learned how to survive before I met Marcus. I do not want this money to create more parasites like Chad or Tanisha. I want it to create human beings who know the value of a dollar and the value of a life." The line was silent for a second, and then Arthur's voice came back thick with respect. "I will draft the paperwork immediately. Marcus chose the right person to guard his legacy, madam." I hung up and looked at the pristine white wall in front of me. I had secured justice for my husband. I had punished the greedy, and now I was planting seeds of kindness in the ashes they left behind. That was the sweetest revenge of all, to live a life that was better, more meaningful and brighter than they could ever dream of. The grand reopening banner fluttered in the autumn breeze draped across the freshly painted white facade of the restaurant. Inside, the air was thick with the savory scent of smoked hickory and the hum of happy conversation, a sound that had been absent during the years Chad was skimming off the top. I stood at the host station checking the digital reservation tablet. We were booked solid for 3 weeks. The ghost of bankruptcy that had haunted this place was gone, exorcised by hard work, honest accounting, and the removal of the parasites that had nearly bled it dry. I looked over at the corner booth, the one Marcus always called the captain's table. It was occupied by the director of St. Jude's Orphanage and 3 teenagers who were celebrating their high school graduation. They were eating on the house, the first recipients of the Marcus Jenkins Scholarship Program. Seeing them laugh, their faces smeared with barbecue sauce, felt like seeing Marcus smile again. The bell above the door jingled, signaling a new arrival. The chatter in the entryway stopped abruptly. I looked up to see why the hostess, a young girl named Maya, had gone silent. Standing in the doorway were 2 women who looked like faded, distorted photocopies of people I used to know. Bernice was wearing a coat that was missing a button, her once impeccable hair pulled back in a messy graying bun. Tanisha stood behind her sans makeup, wearing a generic fast food uniform that smelled faintly of old fryer grease. They didn't look like royalty anymore. They looked hungry. Bernice stepped forward, forcing a smile that cracked the heavy, cheap foundation she was wearing to hide her stress lines. "Keisha," she said, her voice attempting a sweetness that curdled instantly. "The place looks distinct. We saw the line outside. We thought, since it is a family business, we could skip the wait. I just want to see Marcus's picture." Tanisha chimed in, refusing to meet my eyes, clutching a worn-out purse that was definitely not Chanel. "I just need a meal, Keisha. I haven't eaten since my shift started at the burger joint. Just a plate of ribs, for old time's sake." The restaurant had gone quiet. Customers were watching. My staff was watching. This was the moment where the old Keisha, the one who sought their approval, would have caved. She would have seated them in the back, fed them quietly, and handed them a $20 bill to avoid a scene. But that Keisha had died in the vault, along with their inheritance. I walked around the podium and stood toe-to-toe with Bernice. "This is a business, Bernice. We have a dress code and we have a reservation policy. You have neither." "We are the Jenkins family," Bernice hissed, a flash of her old venom surfacing, though it lacked its former bite. "My blood built this place, and your greed nearly destroyed it." I reminded her softly, my voice calm and final. "Chad was sentenced to 8 years yesterday for fraud and extortion." "Did you hear the judge called him a predator? I imagine he is missing his family right now. Maybe you should go visit him during visiting hours instead of harassing paying customers." I signaled to the security guard, the same one who had helped them pack their boxes months ago. "Escort these ladies off the property. If they return, file a trespassing order." Bernice opened her mouth to scream, to play the victim one last time, but the fight had left her. She looked at the warm, glowing dining room, a paradise she was barred from entering, and saw the reality of her choices reflected in the faces of the diners, who turned away from her in embarrassment. Tanisha didn't even argue. She just turned and trudged out into the cold, defeated. As the door closed behind them, shutting out the chill, I turned back to the dining room. "Sorry about the draft, everyone," I announced with a smile. "Please enjoy your meal." The room erupted in applause. I walked back to the kitchen, passing the framed photo of Marcus hanging by the pass. I touched the frame lightly. "We did it, baby. The weeds are pulled. The garden is finally growing. And the harvest is all yours." This story serves as a powerful reminder that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. Often it is merely a strategy waiting to strike. Keisha's victory proves that greed is a self-destructive force, blinding those who harbor it until they walk willingly into their own downfall. While the Jenkins family relied on entitlement and manipulation, Keisha utilized patience and forensic truth to reclaim her life. The ultimate lesson is that you cannot build a prosperous future on the foundation of someone else's suffering. True legacy isn't what you inherit, but the character you maintain when the world tries to break you. If you enjoyed this satisfying saga of justice served cold, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories of retribution.